I'm standing in my boss's office, sweat pouring down my face like a dam breaking over a forsaken valley, my heart hammering against my ribs like a war drum echoing through a battlefield. I've just poured my entire being into this pitch. My vision, my dream, a fragile flame I've guarded through sleepless nights for months, a beacon I'd die to defend. I see it blazing before me. The company reborn, my future a comet tearing the sky apart with its brilliance. And then he leans back in his chair, smirks, a cruel, twisted slash across his face, like I'm some broken child clutching a wilted flower, and says, "Nah, not good enough." Not good enough? The words don't just land. They detonate, a cannonball ripping through my chest, leaving a smoking ruin where hope once stood. My knees buckle, the floor tilting beneath me, but I dig in, staring into his icy, sneering eyes. This small, venomous man in his faded suit, snuffing my dreams with a flick of his wrist like a god dismissing a mortal's prayer. That was it. The breaking point. The birth of wrath. I didn't walk out. I exploded, a hurricane of fury and purpose, the door crashing shut behind me with a bang that rattled the walls. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't crawl. I was finished. Finished with him. Finished with his choking empire. Finished with being a speck in his dim, rotting world. I'd build my own kingdom. And not just that. I'd rise as his destroyer, his nightmare, the shadow that would haunt every gasping breath of his fading life. This isn't a petty squabble. This is an odyssey of devastation and triumph, written in fire and carved in stone. The next morning, I didn't even pause to breathe. I shot awake at 4 a.m., eyes burning like twin furnaces, my mind a tornado of jagged, relentless thoughts. I grabbed my laptop, a cold coffee mug teetering on the edge of chaos, and attacked the keys with a ferocity that shook the table. Ideas poured out, wild, untamed, unstoppable, like a river bursting through a shattered levee, flooding everything in its path. Every concept he'd mocked, every spark he'd crushed. I flung onto the screen, my trembling hands racing to capture the inferno blazing inside me. By the time the sun clawed its way over the horizon, it wasn't a dream anymore. It was a manifesto, a war cry etched in glowing lines of code and ambition. I wasn't messing around. I called Jake at 6 a.m., my voice a razor cutting through his sleepy haze. "Jake, I'm doing it, my own empire. Are you with me or not?" Silence hung heavy, a wire stretched to breaking. Then a rough, incredulous laugh broke through. "You're out of your mind! After that snake gutted you yesterday?" "Dead serious," I growled, my tone low and lethal. "He'll drown in his own regret." A heartbeat then. "I'm in, man. Let's bury him alive." We didn't hesitate. That day, we tore our lives apart to feed the fire. I drained my savings, $12,000. Every last dime I'd hoarded like a lifeline through the storms, throwing it into the blaze without a second thought. Jake tossed in $8,000, his car fund, his voice trembling with a wild, reckless joy as he shouted, "Who needs wheels when we're forging a juggernaut to crush him?" Caution was a coward we left bleeding in the dust. We claimed a rotting office in a strip mall, a dank, forsaken pit where the walls wept with mildew and the lights flickered like the last gasps of a dying soul. It was ours, our war room. No polished desks, no cushioned chairs, just a scarred table, 2 laptops, and a hunger that could swallow the heavens whole. I locked eyes with Jake across that battered expanse, his face a fierce glow in the screen's light, and said, "No turning back. This is our fight." He grinned, a savage, untamed thing. Let's rip his world to shreds. The first week was a plunge into pure chaos. Sleep was a traitor we banished, a luxury we couldn't afford. I'd collapse on the grimy floor, waking with carpet burns branded into my skin like badges of honor, then hurl myself back into the fray. We built a website. Raw, jagged, a digital battle standard raised high. I wrote the copy myself, every word a dagger forged in the furnace of my still seething rage. Tired of being ignored? We hear you. We deliver. Our promise. Simple, brutal, true. Jake wrestled the tech, coding through the night, his grunts of frustration a rhythm to our rebellion as he battled crashes and glitches with bare-knuckled determination. We offered what Greg's crumbling empire couldn't: custom solutions, lightning-fast turnarounds, ideas that didn't die under a tyrant's boot. We went straight for his clients. I aimed for the heart. I knew their names, their wounds. I'd been the one trapped in those endless, soul-crushing meetings, absorbing their cries about delays and hollow promises while Greg sat smugly above it all. Now I was their salvation, their avenging angel. The first client call was a surge of raw adrenaline, a live wire sparking in my grip. I dialed Mark Hensley, a man Greg had bled dry with neglect and arrogance. My voice trembled but sliced like a blade. "Mark, it's me. You know I understand. I've got something better, faster, cheaper, built for you. Drop that fool and rise with me." His laugh was a dry, bitter rasp, edged with disbelief and a flicker of hope. "You're really doing this? Breaking free from that monster?" "With everything I've got," I fired back, my tone a vow. "And I'm taking you with me." A pause stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then, "All right. Send me the details. I'm in." I slammed the phone down, my fist cutting through the air so hard it nearly crashed into the wall. The sting of impact a sweet release. Jake whooped, slamming his laptop shut with a force that echoed like a gunshot. "First blood," he roared. 100 more to claim." That was day 5. By day 10, we had 3 clients. By day 20, 8. The wildfire was spreading, a blaze no one could quench. Greg didn't notice the flames licking at his feet at first. He strutted through his office, barking orders at the drones still chained to his will, oblivious to the storm brewing just beyond his walls. But then the desertions began. Emails like arrows piercing his bloated pride. "We found a better way," they'd write. "Nothing personal." Nothing personal? This was as personal as it got. I imagined him hunched over his desk, that smug grin melting into a mask of confusion, then panic, his fingers trembling as he opened each new message, each one a death knell for his empire. I wanted him to feel it. The slow, suffocating dread of losing everything he'd built, everything he'd taken for granted. And I was the tempest tearing it all down, brick by brick. 3 months in, we were a force of nature. Jake and I brought on 2 more warriors. Lila, a marketing genius with a wit sharp enough to draw blood, and Carlos, a designer who could turn chaos into gold with a flick of his wrist. Our tiny, mold-ridden office buzzed like a hive of rebels, a band of outcasts who didn't care about sleep or sanity. We worked like our lives depended on it, because they did. I'd march into that strip mall every morning, the damp stench a badge of pride, and think, "This is mine. I willed this into existence." Revenue hit $50,000 that month. Not a fortune, not yet, but enough to prove we weren't a fluke. Enough to drive a spike into Greg's side. And he felt it. Words slipped through the cracks, old coworkers texting me in hushed tones, half in awe, half in fear, that he'd called an emergency meeting, his voice cracking as he roared, "Who's stealing our lifeblood?" No one dared say my name. They didn't have to. He knew. He knew it was me, the ghost he'd created, the shadow now clawing at his throat. 6 months after I walked out, he broke. My phone buzzed on the table, his name flashing like a warning flare in the dark. Jake saw it and smirked, leaning back with a glint in his eye. "Here it comes," he said, voice dripping with anticipation. I picked up, my tone cold as a winter blade. What do you want, Greg? A long, choking silence. Then his voice, strained, trying to mask the desperation but failing miserably. Hey, heard you've been busy. Starting something up, huh? I didn't flinch. Yeah, something you couldn't handle. He laughed, but it was a hollow, brittle sound, like glass cracking underfoot. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Your ideas. Maybe I was too quick to dismiss them. Why don't you come back? We could work together. Come back? The audacity lit a fuse in my chest, rage surging like a tidal wave. Greg, I said, slow and deliberate, each word a dagger. I'm not your lackey anymore. I'm your reckoning, and I'm winning. I hung up before he could stammer a reply, the silence on the other end a victory sweeter than any shout. Jake clapped me on the back, his laughter a wild battle cry. You just gutted him, man! Straight to the core! Winning didn't mean resting, it meant striking harder. I was obsessed, possessed, a man consumed by the need to see this through. Every new client was a wound I inflicted on Greg, every dollar a brick in the fortress I was building atop his grave. We abandoned the strip mall for a real office, glass walls gleaming like armor, a view of the city stretching out like a conquered land. Our name in bold letters, Ignite Solutions, my child, my weapon. 9 months in, we hit $200,000 in revenue. A year later, $1.2 million. Greg's company? It was crumbling, a sandcastle dissolving in the tide. He lost half his clients, laid off staff, started cutting corners so badly his name became a joke whispered in boardrooms. I didn't just take his business, I took his pride, his legacy, his everything. I'd catch glimpses of him at industry events, his tie crooked, his eyes darting like a cornered animal's, a man reduced to a shell. Once he met my gaze across a crowded room. I raised my glass, a slow, deliberate toast, my eyes locked on his, unyielding, merciless. He turned away, shoulders slumping, a king stripped of his crown. Victory tasted like blood and honey, a bitter sweetness that fueled me on. But the path wasn't smooth. It was a jagged, brutal climb. There were nights I'd lie awake, staring into the void, sweat soaking the sheets as doubts gnawed at me like wolves circling a wounded prey. Had I pushed too far? Risked too much? A big client dropped us once, called us too small, too untested. Their rejection a slap that echoed Greg's words. I punched a hole in the wall that day, my knuckles bleeding as Jake dragged me back, shouting, "We don't need them! We'll rise higher!" And we did. We clawed our way back, signed 2 more clients that week, our resolve hardening with every blow. Every setback was fuel, every doubt a matchstick igniting the next surge. I wasn't just building a business. I was forging myself in the crucible of my own defiance. 2 years in, we were unstoppable, a juggernaut carving its name into the world. Ignite Solutions had grown to 20 warriors, offices in 3 cities, and a client list that made Greg's look like a pitiful footnote. I'd walk into meetings with CEOs who'd once ignored me, and now they'd lean forward, hanging on my every word, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. "How'd you do it?" they'd ask, as if I'd unlocked some ancient secret. I'd smile, lean back and say, "I stopped asking for permission." That was the key. No gatekeepers, no limits, just me, my team, and a hunger that burned brighter than the sun. Then came the final blow to Greg's reign. His company filed for bankruptcy. I got the news from an old coworker, a texted screenshot of the filing, captioned with a single, stunned word, "Wow." I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I sat there staring at my phone, a strange emptiness settling over me. Not pity, never that, but the hollow quiet of a war finally won. His empire was dust, and mine was rising from the ashes, a phoenix in full flight. Jake found me later, sitting in the dark, and tossed me a soda. "You good?" he asked, his voice steady but searching. I cracked it open, took a long sip, and nodded. Yeah, just figuring out what's next. He grinned, fierce and reckless. Next, we take the world, man. And we did. 3 years after that rejection, Ignite Solutions hit $10 million in revenue. We weren't just Greg's competition anymore. We were the industry's, a force that couldn't be ignored, a name that echoed in every deal, every handshake, every late-night grind. But it started with that moment, his smirk, his not good enough, the spark that lit the fuse of a revolution. I didn't just start a business, I started a movement, a wildfire that would consume everything in its path. Greg? He's a ghost now, a faded memory, a reminder that when they try to bury you, you don't just climb out, you build a throne on their bones. 4 years in, the stakes soared higher. A rival titan emerged, an older, wealthier beast with deeper claws and a hunger to match ours. They didn't just compete. They attacked, undercutting our prices, poaching a key client, spreading whispers that we'd collapse under our own ambition. I felt the ground tremble beneath me, that old panic clawing up my throat like bile. But I didn't break. I called the team together, Jake, Lila, Carlos, the whole legion, and laid IT bare. They think they can crush us, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside. They're wrong. We've been underestimated before. It's our strength. Lila smirked, cracking her knuckles. Let's outsmart them. Carlos nodded, already sketching battle plans. Jake just looked at me, eyes blazing with unshakable faith, and said, "We've got this." We fought back, harder, smarter, fiercer. We didn't just match their prices, we offered value they couldn't touch. Personalized service, relentless innovation, a fire they couldn't douse. Within 6 months, we'd reclaimed our client and snatched 3 more from their grasp. They retreated, tails between their legs, and we stood taller, our banner flying higher. 5 years in, we went global. An office in London, then Tokyo, then Sydney. I flew out for the openings, jet-lagged but buzzing with an electric thrill, shaking hands with partners who saw us as the future incarnate. Back home, our headquarters swelled, a sprawling campus of glass and light, a hum of energy that never stilled, a testament to what we'd built from nothing. Revenue climbed to $50 million. I'd walk those halls, watching my team, now over 100 strong, laughing, brainstorming, pushing boundaries, and feel a swell in my chest so fierce it nearly brought me to my knees. Pride, gratitude. A kid who'd been told not good enough had forged this empire from the ashes of rejection. But the cost crept in, shadows lengthening behind the light. My sister called once, her voice sharp and trembling with anger. "You're disappearing," she said. "This isn't you anymore." I snapped back. "This is everything I am." The line went dead, and we didn't speak for a month. It cut deeper than I'd admit, but I couldn't stop. The drive was a beast inside me, roaring louder with every victory, every wound. I'd sit alone some nights, the office silent, staring at the city lights below, wondering if I'd traded too much for this crown. Then Greg's smirk would flash in my mind, that moment of dismissal, and I'd grip my coffee mug tighter, the fire reigniting. No regrets. This was my destiny. 6 years in, we hit $100 million. The press swarmed. Interviews, profiles, headlines screaming, "The maverick who rewrote the rules." I hated the spotlight, the way it burned, but I wielded it like a sword. Every article, every quote, I'd say, "This is for the ones told no." Prove them wrong. People wrote me, kids with dreams, rebels with scars, dreamers with fire in their veins, saying I'd lit a spark in them. One letter, from a girl in Ohio, hit me like a punch to the gut. My boss laughed at me too, she wrote. "Now I'm starting my own thing. Thank you, I framed it, hung it on my wall, a talisman against the dark. Greg faded into oblivion. I heard he'd moved, some nowhere town, selling insurance or peddling used cars, a shadow of the man who'd once loomed over me. I didn't care. He wasn't the point anymore. The point was the fire, the one he'd ignited, the one I'd fed until it consumed everything in its path. 8 years in, we hit $500 million. We weren't just a company. We were a force, disrupting markets, rewriting the playbook, toppling giants who'd once laughed at the idea of us. I'd walk into boardrooms, once the underdog, now the one they feared, and I'd revel in it. The power, the weight, the sheer audacity of what we'd become. 10 years after that day, I stood on a stage, keynote at a global conference. Thousands of eyes locked on me, lights searing, applause thundering like a storm breaking over a mountain. I didn't script a word, just let it pour from me, raw and unfiltered. "They'll tell you you're not enough," I said, my voice a growl that filled the room. "They'll laugh, dismiss you, try to bury you alive. Let them. Use it. Build something they can't ignore. This," I pointed to the screen behind me, Ignite's logo blazing like a war banner. "This is what happens when you stop asking and start doing." The crowd erupted, a roar that shook the earth beneath my feet. I walked off, heart pounding, and Jake met me backstage, his grin wide and fierce. "You just lit a match for 1,000 more fires," he said. I nodded, the heat still coursing through me. Good. 15 years in, we were $1 billion titan. Offices spanned every continent, a team of thousands carrying the torch. My name a war cry that echoed across borders. I'd drive by that old strip mall sometimes, the mildew-scented cradle of our rebellion, now a gym where weights clanged in the place where we dared to dream. The past was a flicker, a spark I'd fanned into an inferno, but it lived in me. Every rejection, every fight, every victory carved into my bones. I didn't just outgrow Greg. I outgrew the world he knew, the limits he'd tried to chain me with. And I was still burning, still building, still proving that not good enough was the beginning, not the end.